Well, it worked for a minute, and then we burned out both of the positive switches. So these are only designed to carry 12 volts, I would believe. And we run 24 volts through this one and 36 through this one. So I think our next best bet would be solenoids, heavier duty switches basically. So we'll need a switch to turn each one on, turn each one off. It keeps getting more and more complicated. Well, still working on the turbo switch here. Found out what we did with the last test. On both of our positive switches for the 24 volt and 36 volt, we fried out something in the switch. So I put an X over each one of the C's on these two switches because when I tested them, the open side still worked okay. Just the closed side of the switch fried or burned out or something. But the two other switches that we was using for the ground side, both sides still work fine. So this is a diagram for just the plain old switches here that couldn't handle the power, and this was just a side test, I guess you could call it, because the L turbo, I guess 3 switch you would call it, is more set up with actual solenoids, real contactors basically, and then our switch is just a switch that tells the solenoids what to do. So that was the original turbo switch 3 concept, but I kind of just skipped it when I come up with switches, and I was like, well, let me just run the power straight through the switches, see what happens. Well, now we know that doesn't work. So let me see what we got here. So I've marked everything. These two solenoids are our 24 volt side. This is our minus. We got it with the black wires. And then this is our plus for 24 volts. And then this side here is our 36 volt side. These two with the red cables are the plus, 36 volt plus. And then these two with the black cables are the 36 volt negative circuit. So where do we start here? So we've got our 3 batteries, we've got our speed controller, we've got our throttle input, we've got our 4 solenoids, we've got an extra 12 volt battery just to run the 4 solenoids. So these 2 batteries will be the 24 volts to run the speed controller. That's for this hot wire right here. We've got a fuse going to the speed controller. And then the other wire for the speed controller is the negative going to our first battery. So that feeds the power to the speed controller. The power coming out of the speed controller, the blue and white or blue and yellow wires here. Blue is the power and yellow is the negative. So we've got the red for our power and black is our negative. And they go to our first solenoids here. And then the power goes out of here to the motor or out of here to the motor. So these 2 wires go to the motor. And then also we've got 2 grounds from the solenoid bridged together, and they go to the motor. So whichever solenoid turns on, that sends power and ground to the motor, 24 volts, if these 2 solenoids are turned on. If these 2 solenoids get turned on, these shut off and stop all power and ground going to the motor, and these two turn on and send 36 volts to the motor. So we've got all 4 solenoids grounded to our auxiliary battery. Then the power for our auxiliary battery goes to our switches. So we've got the split off. One goes to one switch, the blue wire, and one goes to the other switch, the blue wire. So that's the power in for both switches. Power out, this black fella right here, that's our power in for the 24 volt side. So this switch runs the 24 volt side. This switch runs the 12 volt or the 36 volt side. And this is the wire that turns 36 volts on. Alrighty, I don't have the batteries actually hooked up just yet. I've got this jumper wire disconnected and this jumper wire disconnected. But our auxiliary battery is hooked up, so we're going to do a test just to make sure we can hear these things firing up. So when we engage this switch, we should hear these 2 solenoids turn on. We disengage the switch, these 2 solenoids should shut off. Slide our lever up and engage this switch, it should turn these 2 solenoids on. So I can't tell which ones it is, but then I'll slide up here. Alright, well, we've got our batteries all fired up now and hooked up. Everything's hooked up, turned on. Try the thumb throttle before we turn anything on. Nothing. Alrighty. Okay, we got our switch kicked down. We should have 24 volts of power. And we've got nothing. Well, after extensive checking, it seems like this solenoid here is not working. The minus solenoid for the 24 volt circuit. I've got power going through both sides of this one. Turbo works like a motherfucker. You can hear them kicking in, but this one ain't. Alright, we're going to try this again. I've got another solenoid rigged up in place of the bad solenoid. Got the jumper wires all on it and everything and all rigged up. 2 or 3 different ways I've tried rigging it up. I've blown a bunch of fuses, so let's try it one more time. Got a fresh fuse in there. Doesn't work now. Let's kick our switch on. Yes, and it's working. I'm going to kick in overdrive. And it works. Boom, bitches. So when our lever's in the down position, it clicks on these 2 solenoids to power with the thumb throttle. So I'll clamp this down just to show you. That's locked on. Our 24 volt works as normal. And then we would kick up our turbo lever. It kicks on these 2 solenoids. just like it's supposed to. I think we have turbo. Now I'm going to have to get all this mess cleaned up and rig it all up on the cart and try some real world or load tests. More to come.